2 hours and I still haven't woken up yet. Hi guys, this is Connie, and I clean you off and get ready to do an episode of Connie Reads Another Fine Myth. This is chapter 8. Eventually I'm going to get on a roll and read more throughout the day, so you'll see the same scarf and the same not awake thing, but for now I'm just going to do one chapter at a time. A quote: "In times of crisis, it is of utmost importance not to lose one's head." A quote from Marie Antoinette. The four of us stood frozen, a tableau, for several minutes, studying each other. My mind was racing. I could not focus on the definite course of action. I decided to follow Oz's lead and simply stood regarding the two figures coolly, trying to ignore the two crossbows leveled steadily at us. Finally, one of our visitors broke the silence. "Well, Throckwaddle, aren't you going to invite your friends to sit down?" Surprisingly, this was addressed to me. I said. "Yes, Throckwaddle," Oz drawled, turning to me. "And aren't you going to introduce me to your colleagues?" I repeated. "Perhaps he doesn't remember us," the second figure injected sarcastically. "Nonsense," responded the first with equal sarcasm. "His two oldest friends, Brockhurst and Higgins? How could he possibly not remember our names? Just because he forgot to share the loot doesn't mean he'd forget our names. Be fair, Higgins." "Frankly, Brockhurst," responded the other, "I'd rather he remembered the loot and forgot our names." Their words were stuffy and casual, but the crossbows never wavered. I was beginning to get the picture. Apparently these two were imps Oz had assured me couldn't overtake us. Fortunately, it seemed like they thought I was the imp who had killed Garkin. At least, I thought it was fortunate. "Gentlemen," Oz exclaimed, stepping forward, "let me say what a great pleasure it is to—" He stopped as Brockhurst's crossbow leapt to his shoulder in one smooth move. "I'm not sure who you are," he intoned, "but I'd advise you to stay out of this. This is a private matter between the three of us." "Brockhurst," interrupted Higgins, "it occurs to me we may be being a bit hasty in our actions." "Thank you, Higgins," I said, greatly relieved. "Now that we've established contact," he continued, favoring me with an icy glare, "I feel we should perhaps secure our traveling companion before we continue this discussion." "I suppose you're right, Higgins," Brockhurst admitted grudgingly. "Be a good fellow and fetch him along while I watch these two." I feel that would be ill-advised on two counts. First, I refuse to approach that beast alone, and second, that would leave you alone, facing 2-to-1 odds, if you get my point. "Quite. Well, what do you suggest?" "That we both fetch our traveling companion and return without delay. And what is to keep these two from making a hasty departure? The fact that we'll be watching them from somewhere in the darkness with crossbows, I believe that should be sufficient to discourage them from making, any movements which might be subject to misinterpretation." "Very well," Brockhurst yielded grudgingly. "Throckwaddle, I would strongly suggest you not attempt to avoid us further. While I don't believe we could be any more upset with you than we already are, that might actually succeed in provoking us further." With that, the two figures faded back into darkness. "What are we going to do, Oz?" I whispered frantically. He seemed not to hear me. "Imps," he chortled, rubbing his hands together gleefully. "What a stroke of luck." "Oz, they're going to kill me." Relax, kid. Like I said, imps are gullible. If they're really thinking, they would have shot us down without talking. I haven't met an imp yet I couldn't talk circles around. He cocked his head, listening. "They're coming back now. Just follow my lead. Oh, yes, I almost forgot. Drop the disguise on my features when I give you the cue." "But you said they couldn't catch—" I broke off as the two imps reappeared. They were leading a war unicorn between them. The hoods of the cloaks were back now, revealing their features. I was moderately surprised to see they looked human. Seedy, perhaps, but human nonetheless. Then I saw Quigley. He was sitting woodenly astride the unicorn, lurching back and forth with the beast's stride. His eyes were staring fixedly straight ahead, and his right arm was raised as if in salutation. The light of the fire reflected off his face as if it were glass, and I realized with horror he was no longer alive, but a statue of some unidentified substance. Any confidence I might have gained from Oz's assurances left me in a rush. Gullible or not, the imps played for keeps, and any mistake we made would in all likelihood be our last. "Who's that?" Oz asked, interrupting my thoughts. I realized I had been dangerously close to showing a betraying sign of recognition of the statue. "There will be time for that later, if indeed there's a later," said Higgins, grimly dropping the unicorn's reins and raising his crossbow. "Yes," echoed Brockhurst, imitating Higgins' move with his own weapon. "First, there's a matter of explanation to be settled. Throckwaddle?" "Gentlemen, gentlemen," said Oz soothingly, stepping between me and the crossbows. "Before you proceed, I must insist on introducing myself properly. If you will but allow me a moment while I remove my disguise." The sight of the two weapons had rattled me so badly I almost missed my cue. Fortunately, I managed to gather my scattered senses and closed my eyes, shakingly executing the change feature spell to convert Oz back to his normal, dubious appearance. I'm not sure what reaction I had expected from the imps at the transformation, but the one I got surpassed any possible expectations. "By the gods below!" gasped Brockhurst. "A pervert!" gasped Higgins. "That's pervect," smiled Oz, showing all his pointed teeth. "And don't ever forget it, friend imps." "Yes, sir," they chorused in unison. They were both standing in slack-jawed amazement, crossbows dangling forgotten in their hands. From their terrified reactions, I began to suspect that despite all his bragging, Oz had perhaps not told me everything about his dimension or the reputation of its inhabitants. Oz ignored their stares and plopped down again at his place by the fire. "Now that that's established, why don't you put away those silly crossbows and sit down so we can chat like civilized folk, eh?" He gestured impatiently, and they hastened to comply. I also resumed a sitting position, not wishing to be the only one left standing. "But why are you here, sir, if you don't mind me asking?" Brockhurst finally managed to get the whole question out. However incompetent he might be as a demon, he sure knew how to grovel. "Ah," smiled Oz, "therein lies the story." I settled back. This could take a while. I was summoned across the dimensions barrier by one Garkin, a magician I had never cared for much. It seems he was expecting some trouble from a rival, and was eager to enlist my aid for the upcoming fracas. Now, as I said before, I have never been fond of Garkin, and was not particularly wild about joining him. He began growing unpleasant for his insistence, to the point that I considered swaying from my normal easygoing nature to take action against him, when who should appear but Throckwaddle here, who did me the favor of putting a quarrel into the old slime stirrer. Oz acknowledged me with an airy wave. I tried to look modest. Naturally, we fell into chatting afterward, and he mentioned he was in the employment of one Istvan, and that his action against Garkin had been part of an assignment. "You answered questions about an assignment?" Higgins turned to me, aghast. "Yes, I did," I snarled at him. "Wouldn't you, considering the circumstances?" "Oh, yes, of course." He darted a nervous glance at Oz and lapsed into respectful silence again. "Anyway," Oz continued, "it occurred to me I owed this fellow Istvan a favor for riding me out of a nagging nuisance, so I suggested I accompany Throckwaddle back to his employer, that I might offer him my services, on a limited basis, of course." "You could have waited for us," Brockhurst glowered at me. "Well, I wanted... You see, I insisted," Oz smiled. "You see, my time is quite valuable, and I had no desire to waste it waiting around." "Oh," said Brockhurst. Higgins was not so easily swayed. "You could have left us a message," he muttered. "We did," Oz replied. "My ring, in full view on the table. I see you found it." He pointed an accusing finger at Brockhurst. I noticed for the first time the imp was wearing Garkin's ring. "This ring?" Brockhurst started. Is it yours? I thought it was part of Garkin's loot that had been overlooked. Yes, it's mine. Oz bared his teeth. I'm surprised you didn't recognize it, but now that we're united, you will, of course, return it. Certainly, the imp fumbled in his haste to remove the ring. Careful there, Oz cautioned. You know how to operate it, don't you? It can be dangerous in ignorant hands. Of course I know how to operate it, Brockers replied in an injured tone. You press against the ring with the fingers on either side of it. I saw one like it at the bazaar on Deva once. He tossed the ring to Oz, who caught it neatly and slipped it on his finger, fortunately to fit. I made a mental note to ask Oz to let me try using the ring sometime, now that we knew how it worked. Now that I've explained about me, how about answering my question, Oz said, leveling a finger at the Quigley statue. Who is that? I'm getting texts. Okay, let's not get distracted. We aren't sure ourselves, Higgins admitted. It's all quite puzzling, really, Brockhurst added. Wouldn't you care to elaborate on that? Oz prompted. Well, it happened about 3 days back. We were following your trail with hopes of reuniting our group. Suddenly, this warrior gallops out of the brush ahead of us and bars our path. It was as if he knew we were coming and was waiting for us. Istvan was right, he shouts. This region does abound with demons. Istvan? I said, doing my best to look puzzled. That's what he said. It surprised us too, I mean. Here we are working for Istvan, and we're set upon by a man claiming to be sent by the same employer. Anyway, then he says, Behold the weapon of your doom, and draws a sword. What kind of sword was it? Oz asked innocently. Nothing special. Actually, a little substandard from all we could see. Well, it put us in a predicament. We had to defend ourselves, but we were afraid to harm him on the off chance he really was working for Istvan. What did you do? I asked. Frankly, we said, to heck with it, and took the easy way out. Higgins, here, bounced one of his stone balls off the guy's forehead and froze him in place. We've been dragging him along ever since. We figure we'll dump him in Istvan's lap and let him sort it out. A wise solution, commented Oz. They inclined their heads graciously at the compliment. One question I'd like to ask, I interjected. How are you able to overtake us, encumbered as you were? Well, it was no small problem. We had little hope of overtaking you as it was, and with our new burden, it appeared it would be impossible, Brockhurst began. So we're naturally quite eager to join you, so we resorted to desperate measures, Higgins continued. We took a side trip to Twix and sought the aid of the devil here. It cost us a pretty penny, but he finally agreed to teleport our group to the trail ahead of you, allowing us to make our desired contact. Devil? What devil? Oz interrupted. Frumple, the devil at Twixt. The one who... Brockhurst broke off suddenly, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. He shot a dark glance at Higgins, who was casually reaching for his crossbow. I'm surprised Throckwaddle hasn't mentioned Frumple to you, Higgins purred. After all, he's the one who told us about him. And that's the end of Chapter 8. This is getting more and more interesting by the moment. Tune in next time. Be careful with that and enjoy, please and thank you. Thanks for waking me up. I guess this is better than coffee. Bye.